The year is 1346. The king has a well-trained and well-equipped army of 30,000 troops heading for Yorkshire. He's on the orders of the King of France. He plans to take Durham, garrison it with men, and move on to York via Beverley. This is the story of the sack of Beverley during the Scottish Wars of Independence. I hope you enjoy it. The start of this story came from a battlefield book. I read that after the Battle of Byland, in which the Scots smashed Edward II's army, the whole of the north of England was exposed and the Scots decided to have their fun. They looted and pillaged, according to the book, as far south as Beverley. Now, I'd never imagined Highlanders running amok around the streets I see every day, so I thought this is a story worth investigating. And here it is. If you enjoy it, please subscribe. Let me know what you think. Add a comment. It'd be lovely to hear from you. And there's plenty more stories to come. Okay, on with the story. We begin our story in 1307 with the death of the King of England, Edward I, also known as Longshanks and Hammer of the Scots. His son, also called Edward, took over the throne. He lacked the experience, the skill and the authority to carry on his father's legacy. The Scots would jump on this opportunity to wrestle their kingdom from the English crown and regain their independence. It would be the north of England that would bear the brunt of what unfolded. Edward II was keen to reassert himself upon the Scottish throne. He took a 10,000 strong army to Berwick. On the way, he quartered his men in Beverley. Whilst here, he recruited all able-bodied men between the ages of 20 and 60 years old into his army. Now, Beverley, and I'm currently at the Minster, was under the control of the Archbishop of York. It had for a long time profited from a rich wool trade, and another rich trade were pilgrims visiting the shrine of St. John of Beverley, just in there.
A few hundred years earlier, King Stephen, at war with Matilda over the Norman inheritance, had a greater affection for his safety than for the church, and chose Beverley as a site for a strongly fortified castle and a permanent military garrison. The Archbishop disliked the idea of mercenary soldiers being protected by military law, which would mean sacrificing his rights and liberties over the land he controls. However, Stephen immediately desisted from the project after a visit from St. John of Beverley in a dream. St. John appeared with a stern look and threatening gestures and warned of the vengeance against him and his prosperity should he dare to have the temerity of polluting his peaceful establishment with a military garrison.
By the time of Edward II's reign, Beverley's defences consisted of wooden gates, a ditch running round the perimeter, probably topped with a wooden palisade, but it was all noted to be in a dilapidated state.
Edward, on campaign in Scotland, suffered a humiliating loss to the Scottish at the Battle of Bannockburn. With the English routed, Robert the Bruce restored the independent kingdom of Scotland and had almost free reign over the north of England, perfect for pillaging and plundering to refill the drained coffers of the Scottish kingdom. A few years later, in 1318, James Douglas, son of Sir William Douglas, known as the Bold, who fought alongside the famous William Wallace, took an army to ravage Yorkshire. He successfully sacked and looted Ripon. James was not just carrying out the quarrels of his father. Years earlier, James had been stripped of his lands by Edward I and given to Robert Clifford. No doubt Clifford was loyal to the English crown. Douglas tried to regain his lost lands through a peaceful petition to Edward. After this was denied, he relied on a guerrilla war against Clifford to win back his lands. A successful raiding campaign would provide him with the funds needed to conduct his guerrilla war to win back his rightful lands. It is no surprise to learn at this stage that Douglas started earning a name for himself. Sir James the Good if you were Scottish, and the Black Douglas if you were English. For all his inadequacies, Edward II was not one to give up too easily. He raised an army to march on and reclaim the town of Berwick, a strategically advantageous town to control for either side, which lies on what was a fluid Scottish-English border region.
Edward II quartered his army in Beverley, and no doubt, like Athelstan did before him, he would have prayed at the shrine of St John of Beverley. For the second time, Edward II requested that all able-bodied men between the ages of 20 and 60 were recruited into his army and marched north. This left Beverley and the surrounding areas with only the very old, the very young, and the infirm looking after the place. If you disobeyed the king's orders on the first command, you'd lose a third of your worldly goods. If you disobeyed a second time, you'd lose the remainder of your goods on your worldly possessions. But the third time, your body was put at the king's disposal, as it were.
With the English army committed to a siege in Berwick, James Douglas, along with a Scottish general, the Earl of Murray, marched an army to ravage the land of Yorkshire, marching on York. Although the city walls dissuaded the Scots from entering the city, they still looted and burned the suburbs and surrounding areas. Douglas, known for his guerrilla warfare, would not have wanted to get into a lengthy siege. It would have been to their advantage to stay mobile, to loot and to cause as much fear and destruction as they could. Despite a rampant Scottish army laying waste to the north of his kingdom, Edward II stood firm with his army in Berwick, continuing his siege. Douglas and Murray took full advantage of the situation by laying waste to Hexham, Otley, Sherburn and once again Ripon. A few soldiers defending the bishoprics were slain with the tenants. They looted horses, weapons, carriages, silver and brass. Many of these places recorded the loss of over half their value. Shortly after these events, Edward II exempted monks from paying taxes, but would not confront the rampant Scots.
The king wasn't protecting the north. He wasn't protecting Yorkshire. That job fell to William Melton, Provost of Beverley and Archbishop of York. It was written that William was a soldier and a leader, more because of the indignity of the affront than any real hopes of success. Despite that, he managed to raise 10,000 troops. And bear in mind, all able-bodied men between the ages of 20 and 60 in the Beverley area were with the King's army in Berwick. So with that, William Melton took his 10,000 strong army and marched them to Myton on Swale, where they met the Scots, who, according to writers of the time, believed that there was a contingent of around 2,000 to 3,000 soldiers.
The Scots, being pursued, got themselves into battle positions either side of a bridge crossing the river. As the army of William Melton approached, the Scots set fire to haystacks, carefully positioned so the smoke would be blown by the wind in the direction of the advancing army. With the English covered in smoke, limiting their vision, we can only imagine the carnage that must have ensued. The Scots charged at the confused and bewildered English, cutting them down and making great slaughter. It was a rout. William Melton lost between 2,000 and 4,000 men in that battle. Many more were taken prisoner.
After the smoke had cleared the battlefield, it became clear to the Scots why they could overturn such a huge disadvantage in terms of numbers. The 10,000 strong army of William Melton consisted of nothing more than clergymen, monks and canons. It was a far cry from the battle-hardened Scots that they fought. As a result, the Scottish would refer to this fight as the chapter of the Myton, and the English would refer to this as the White Battle. Such was the fall of the priesthood.
By 1321, the people of Beverley, and indeed the whole of Yorkshire, must now have felt unprotected and extremely vulnerable. The land around them was looted, burned and ravaged. It appeared the Crown had abandoned the north to the fate of the ever-rampant Scottish armies. There was still some hope for the people of Beverley. Previously, the Crown had agreed to pay for defensive walls to replace the ditches and wooden palisade that was crumbling around the town. The burgesses of Beverley wrote to the king asking for him to pay for the wall as agreed previously, stating the ditch is not suitable for the improvements and the protection of the town of Beverley. After some thought, the king responds to William Melton on the matter. The town was denied the funds with no reason given, However, York and Hull were provided with the funds for defensive structures. I can only surmise that York, being an important northern city, and Hull, a port town on the up and up, took funding precedence over a market town that had passed its peak. In 1322, the English fortunes failed to reverse. Further to the loss of wealth through looting and the lack of farmable land due to widespread burning of fields, monasteries and bishoprics began to disband, as the suffering was so severe these areas could no longer sustain life, a situation resembling the harrying of the north by William of Normandy 250 years earlier. Under pressure to act, Edward II took an army into Scotland, reaching Edinburgh without challenge. What little of the city's population remained were killed by the English army and places looted, but little was gained. Robert the Bruce wisely played a longer game and didn't confront the English in battle, which was to pay off in the long run. With little to achieve and an expensive and increasingly sick army, Edward decided to march back to England. Robert the Bruce followed at a distance and must have been rubbing his hands with glee as the English numbers began to drop as despondent units decided to cut their losses and drift home. The biggest problem facing the English, though, was dysentery, a common problem for armies to face in the Middle Ages. This decimated the army as numbers of fighting fit men plummeted as they limped across the country. Edward would set up camp for his ailing army in a place he considered safe enough. We now call this area Sutton Bank in the North Yorkshire moors. The sickly, decimated army of Edward II may have taken some hope by being camped on the higher ground with the added protection that brings. Robert the Bruce, however, had another trick up his sleeve. He dispatched his Highlanders to confront the English army, as fighting in hills, mountains and valleys is what they did best. With his main army engaged on a frontal assault, and Highlanders routing from the back, the Scots smashed the English and finished them off. Edward barely escaped with his life. Edward had abandoned his army, and once again he had abandoned the north of England. The ever-impossible task of defending Yorkshire once again fell on the shoulders of William Melton, Archbishop of York. Having looted Ripon many times before, one can only guess that there was little for the Scots to take. This time it was burnt to the ground. According to records of the time, the destruction went from Ripon almost unto Beverley. No doubt, in a panic, the treasures of Bridlington Priory were loaded onto a cart to be taken away from the marauding Scots to a place of safety. The treasure did escape Bridlington, but walked straight into the path of the advancing Scots, who would have gratefully accepted this gift, adding it to their ever-growing pile of loot. Worried that Beverley will be next, a letter without signature, though possibly from the Provost to the Dean of York, asked for help. The first piece of advice was to pay a considerable lump sum to keep them at bay, or suffer as Ripon did in the early days of the Troubles. The letter goes on to suggest that if danger continues to press, send for Sir Alan, Master of the Fabric, and without anyone knowing, put the saint's relics in the treasury, as well as remove the silver plates from the outer shrine and put them in a safe place, although preferably not in the path of the enemy like Bridlington. 2 further letters were sent from Beverley. The first was addressed to the most excellent prince, illustrious King of Scotland, with reverence and honour due to such a king. The transparent and desperate flattery shows just how helpless and vulnerable they were. The letter asks Robert Bruce for protection in exchange for the Blessed Confessor's intervention. Given the records of St. John's interventions with figures like William the Conqueror or King Stephen, I can see how this may have been a veiled threat as much as an offer of genuine support. The second letter was sent to 2 laymen asking them to treat with King Robert. Now this is speculation on my part, as I have no further information on this letter or the subsequent meeting. I guess that the 2 men did not negotiate empty-handed, and this may be the Provost of Beverley acting upon the advice of the Dean of York. The Scots didn't arrive. St. John again had saved his minster, unlike St. Wilfrid of Ripon. Or should credit go to the 2 laymen sent, possibly with bags of money, to meet with Robert the Bruce. By the year 1346, around 20 years later, Edward II had died, and on the throne sat his son, also called Edward.
Edward III was nothing like his father, being a competent military commander like his grandfather, Longshanks.
Edward had grand plans. He wanted what he believed was his rightful inheritance: Aquitaine, Normandy, Anjou, Blois, and through his mother Isabella the she-wolf of France, the Kingdom of France itself. To press his claims, he needed peace on the British Isles, and the Scots, allied with France, were more than happy to keep probing and test out this new king. This meant for the residents of Yorkshire, who would still be recovering from the loss of men, women and children slaughtered during the wars, as well as the continuing hardships for those that had remained through a great loss of wealth and farmable land. Edward III had taken a large army to France. The French king asked David to send an army to England. 30,000 well-armed, trained soldiers, believing only countrymen, shepherds, the infirm and the clergy were left in England. The Scottish planned to take Durham, garrison it with soldiers, and then move on to York via Beverley. Edward was resolute and would not break off his French campaign. This was a risky strategy. To lose the north of England would surely put an end to his campaigning in France. Edward may be on his way to becoming a powerful ruler, but he was not there yet, and he didn't do it all on his own. He had the support of his wife, Philippa of Hainault. Philippa was a popular character. She was kind and generous and had a positive influence over her husband when it came to governing the country, acting as regent when her husband was out on campaign. It was to Philippa he would turn to when the north needed protection, along with the Archbishop of York, William de la Zouch, and Lord Percy, Duke of Northumberland. Their army, consisting mainly of archers, clergy, priests and hobblers, met at York. Messages were sent to Hull and Beverley with orders to defend themselves at all costs if Philippa failed. As the English army pressed on, the beleaguered people of Beverley armed themselves in compliance with the Queen's commands. This was Beverley's last stand. What follows may be a testament to the years of war, famine and destruction that had oppressed the area for so long. Appearing in the marketplace with naked feet as an emblem of humility, and bare-headed in token of reverent awe, were the last remains of the town's population of fighting age. Each had a sword, at his back a quiver of arrows, and a bow in his hands. They implored God and the saints that the effort of the Queen might be successfully employed in delivering the people of England from the cruel enemy who sought their destruction. The inhabitants of Beverley were so greatly affected by this pious and magnanimous act of devotion they began to weep. Their tears wetted the cobbles of the marketplace, prompting St. John into protecting Beverley once more. Beverley was indeed saved from the Scots this time, using all they had left, their humble piety. As for Queen Philippa and her commanders, William de la Zouch and Lord Percy, I hear they did well in battle. Well, that was the sack of Beverley, or not, as it turned out. There was a lot of loss, though. There was a loss of life, a loss of wealth through bribes, pillaging, loss of land and crops. It begs the question, would it have been cheaper to just build the defensive structures in the first place? I don't know. I don't have the information to answer that. What did happen after these events, though? In 1409 was the North Bar, a place where the town can extract tolls, for instance, and contains the gates to keep the town relatively safe. They built the North Bar in brick for £96 and 11.5 pence. This is the earliest brick gate in the country. Quite an honour. Although, given what happened previously, it feels more like a tokenistic gesture. One small redeeming feature of this, though, is the North Bar still stands today and is beautiful. You can go and visit it, but I just want anyone out there to be aware, if you think Beverley is a soft touch, we may not even have crumbling palisades anymore, we may not even have the ditch. However, we do have a police station, CCTV, and I have been told that the local residents are not averse to shaving their heads, taking off their shoes and crying in the marketplace if anybody comes here to try anything funny. Thank you for listening. Until next time, goodbye.